Family dinners at my sister Melena's house were always a masterclass in passive aggressive performance art. Tonight, the main act was me. Before I continue, comment your country or city. I love seeing where my stories land. My name is Zoe, and I'm 32 years old. For the past decade, I've poured my life into building a wellness studio from the ground up, starting with just a massage table in a rented room. I paid my way through school, worked 3 jobs, and eventually scraped enough together to open my own place. It's thriving, actually. I have 5 employees, a waiting list of clients, and enough stability that I haven't had to ask my parents for a dime since I was 18. But none of that ever seemed to register. So, Zoe, my mother, Sasha, said, her voice dripping with the kind of saccharine sweetness that always preceded a verbal jab. She was 58, impeccably dressed, and perpetually disappointed in me. Still doing massages, dear? After all these years? I was sitting across from her at Milena's polished mahogany dining table, surrounded by the usual suspects. Milena, 36, the lawyer, sat at the head. Her husband, Santiago, 38, the other lawyer, beside her. My brother Adrian, 34, the perpetually almost there entrepreneur, was on my left, already halfway through his second glass of red wine. Stephanie, 33, my middle sister and the queen of curated perfection, sat next to her husband Ellis, 35, who nodded along to whatever Stephanie said. My father, Clyde, 61, was at the far end, quiet as ever, just happy to be fed. Yes, Mom, I replied, my smile feeling like it was glued on. It's what I do. My studio is doing really well. Sasha just hummed a non-committal sound that translated to, "That's nice, dear, but it's not a real job." No one else even looked up. They were used to this dance. Earlier, I'd arrived with a homemade apple pie, still warm from my oven. I'd spent hours on it, perfecting the lattice crust, using the crispest honey crisps. It was my small contribution, a quiet way of showing I cared, even if my contributions were rarely seen. When dessert rolled around, everyone raved. "Zoe, this pie is incredible!" Stephanie exclaimed, taking a second slice. "The crust is divine." Adrian grunted his approval, mouthful. Even Milena, usually too busy dissecting legal briefs in her head, admitted, "It's surprisingly good, Zoe." A tiny spark of pride flickered inside me. Maybe, just maybe, this time it would be different. Then Sasha cleared her throat, a delicate, almost imperceptible sound that nonetheless commanded attention. "Oh, yes," she said, beaming at the table. "Isn't it wonderful? I picked it up from that lovely little bakery downtown this morning. They do such a marvelous job." The spark died. My fork clattered against my plate. Everyone murmured their agreement, nodding at Sasha, praising her for finding such a wonderful bakery. My father, Clyde, even gave her a proud little smile. He knew. He had to know. But he said nothing. He never did. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, a slow burn of indignation that had been simmering for decades. I forced my lips into a polite, thin line. "Yes, Mom." It's a very good bakery. Later, after Adrian had regaled everyone with a rambling, self aggrandizing account of his latest disruptive business idea, which sounded suspiciously like the last 3 that had failed spectacularly, Sasha raised her glass. "To Adrian," she announced, her voice ringing with pride, "for always taking risks, for having the courage to chase his dreams no matter the setbacks. That's what true success looks like." My blood ran cold. Setbacks was a polite word for the crater he'd left in his wake, a crater that had swallowed a significant chunk of my parents' retirement savings, though no one ever spoke of it directly. And courage? What about the quiet, relentless grit it took to build something from nothing without a safety net, without a single cheer from the sidelines? That wasn't courage, apparently. That was just being Zoe, invisible. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. The words I wanted to scream lodged in my throat. I just smiled, a brittle, fragile thing, and excused myself. I needed air. I needed out. As I grabbed my coat from the hall closet, I heard Sasha's voice, clear and sharp, carrying from the dining room. "I just wish Zoe would grow up. Everyone else did." I didn't look back. I just walked out the door and into the cool night air, the sound of her words echoing in my ears. The sting of Mom's words. I just wish Zoe would grow up. Everyone else did. Followed me all the way home. But by the time I unlocked my apartment door, the anger had cooled into something colder, sharper. It wasn't just about the pie or the toast to Adrian, it was about a lifetime of being overlooked, of my quiet achievements being dismissed while my siblings' loudest failures were celebrated as risks. This particular brand of family blindness wasn't new. It was a constant hum in the background of my life, a low frequency noise I'd learned to live with. But it had amplified significantly about a year and a half ago when the hum turned into a frantic, hushed shouting match I wasn't meant to hear. I'd gone over to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, to drop off some of my homemade elderberry syrup for Dad's cough. They were usually home around then. Dad would have been pushing 60, Mom in her mid 50s. As I approached the front door, I heard it. Not muffled, but raw, desperate. "Clyde, what are we going to do?" Mom's voice, usually so composed, was shrill. "They're threatening foreclosure. $110,000. How could Adrian do this to us?" My hand froze on the doorknob. Adrian? Of course. His latest brilliant venture, a rental property he'd bought with their co signed loan, promising passive income and early retirement for them. Instead, it had become a money pit, then a legal nightmare, and finally a complete bust. He'd walked away, dusting his hands, already on to the next big idea. My parents, however, were left holding the bag. "Sasha, keep your voice down." Dad, quiet as ever, sounded tired, defeated. He said he'd figure it out. He's working on it. Working on what? Another failed startup? We're going to lose everything, Clyde. Everything we worked for. I peered through the living room window, just enough to see them. Mom was clutching a crumpled letter, her face pale. Dad was rubbing his temples, a vein throbbing in his forehead. It looked like a foreclosure notice, plain as day, on $10,000. It hit me like a physical blow. That was their mortgage, the one they'd been chipping away at for 30 years. Adrian's risk had put their home, their security, at stake. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. They'd never ask me for help. Not in a million years. In their eyes, I was still the kid who did massages, the one who hadn't gone to law school or landed a corporate job. They didn't know about the 5 year plan I'd meticulously executed, the sleepless nights spent balancing books, the loan I'd secured to expand my studio, or the fact that I was now making more than Adrian ever had in his life. They didn't know I could help, and they certainly wouldn't let me. It would be an admission of their golden boy's failure and an acknowledgement of my quiet success, two things they seemed incapable of processing. That night, I started making calls, not to them, but to a lawyer specializing in real estate and financial transactions. I explained vaguely that I wanted to make an anonymous payment on a mortgage. The lawyer, a no nonsense woman named Ms. Chen, didn't bat an eye. She suggested setting up an LLC for anonymity and legal protection. She'd explained, "You'll be the sole owner, but the payment will come from the LLC. No direct link to you." I thought about names. Something innocuous. Something that wouldn't raise eyebrows. Michelle D. It was my middle name and the initial of our surname. Simple, unassuming. Within weeks, Michelle D. Holdings, LLC, was registered. Ms. Chen handled all the paperwork. It felt surreal, signing documents that would erase a debt that had been crushing my parents, all while keeping my involvement a secret. The money was there, sitting in my business account, a testament to years of quiet, relentless work. It was a substantial sum, but I'd been saving aggressively, reinvesting, and my studio was finally generating significant profit. It wouldn't cripple me, it would, however, free them. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not Adrian, not Milena, not Stephanie, not even my father. The only person I started to confide in, slowly, was Vada Hamilton, my business partner. She'd joined me about 8 months ago, a whirlwind of energy and brilliant ideas, and at 29, she was already a force. We'd bonded over late night paperwork sessions and shared frustrations about the wellness industry. One evening, after I'd accidentally let slip a vague detail about family drama, Vada had looked at me, her dark eyes perceptive. You know, Zoe, she'd said, leaning back in her chair, you carry a lot of weight, and you never let anyone see how strong you are. It's like you're afraid to let your wins show. I just shrugged, but her words stuck with me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was. But watching my parents struggle, knowing I could fix it and knowing they'd never accept it from me directly, it felt like the only way. A quiet, unseen act, a secret strength. The echo of Mom's words, I just wish Zoe would grow up. Everyone else did, faded into the background hum of my life, replaced by the constant thrum of my expanding business. It had been a few weeks since Milena's dinner, and the incident had just reinforced what I already knew. My family saw what they wanted to see, and what they wanted to see was not me. My studio, the quiet haven, was anything but quiet these days. We just finished renovating the adjacent unit, adding two new treatment rooms, a small yoga studio, and a dedicated space for workshops. My calendar was a chaotic masterpiece of color coded appointments, staff schedules, and vendor meetings. I was often there until midnight, sometimes later, doing paperwork, prepping for the next day, or just sitting in the quiet, empty space, feeling the weight of everything I'd built. Nobody in my family knew the real cost of this. They didn't know I'd worked 3 jobs through college, paying my tuition and rent myself, while Adrian was still getting his allowance for his entrepreneurial pursuits. They didn't know about the years I pulled triple shifts, living on instant noodles and pure stubbornness, saving every spare dollar. They certainly didn't know about the substantial loan I'd taken out to secure this new, larger space, a loan I was now comfortably paying down thanks to a steady stream of clients and Vada's sharp business acumen. My parents, Sasha and Clyde, probably still pictured me in a tiny, dimly lit room, kneading backs for minimum wage. The irony was almost comical. While Adrian was busy burning through their retirement savings on his latest pipe dream, I was quietly building a small empire, brick by brick, massage by massage. My work was my sanctuary, and sometimes my therapy. I spent my days listening to people's stories, their stresses, their physical and emotional pain. I'd knead out knots from shoulders hunched over keyboards, soothe aching muscles from too much running, or simply hold space for someone who just needed to feel seen and touched in a gentle, non judgmental way. Just yesterday, I had a client, Sarah, a woman in her late 40s who carried the weight of her entire family on her shoulders. She came in with a tension headache that had lasted days. As I worked on her neck and scalp, she started talking, slowly at first, then a torrent of frustration about her ungrateful kids and demanding husband. I just listened, offering a quiet hum of understanding, a gentle pressure point here and there. By the end of the session, her headache was gone and her eyes were clearer. Thank you, Zoe, she'd whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I'd do without you. You understand. I smiled, a genuine one this time. That's what I'm here for, Sarah. But as she left, I felt the familiar ache in my own chest. I could help Sarah release her burdens, but who was there to release mine? Who saw my quiet strength, my silent struggles, the emotional damage from years of being the family's ghost, the one who was never quite good enough, was a knot I couldn't quite massage out of myself. Vada, my business partner, was the closest I had to an ally who truly understood. She was 29, sharp as a tack, and had a way of cutting through my self effacing tendencies. She'd joined me about 8 months ago, bringing a fresh perspective and a drive that matched my own. She'd seen the numbers, the growth, the sheer volume of work I put in. She saw me. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of back to back appointments and a late night staff meeting, I was finally home, collapsing onto my couch. My phone buzzed. It was Vada. You always hide your wins, the text read. Time for someone to notice. Sasha Delgado considered herself a woman who paid attention. She managed the household finances, kept track of every bill, and prided herself on her meticulous organization. So when a plain white envelope arrived from their mortgage lender, addressed simply to occupant, She opened it with her usual efficiency, expecting a routine statement. What she found inside made her perfectly manicured hand tremble. It wasn't a statement, it was a letter dated just a few days prior, confirming that the outstanding mortgage balance on their property had been paid in full. Zero balance, account closed. Her eyes scanned the document, then scanned it again, searching for a name, a familiar account number, anything that made sense. There, tucked away in a small print section, was the source of the payment: Michelle D. Holdings, LLC. Michelle D. Holdings, LLC. The name meant absolutely nothing to her. Sasha, 58, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This was impossible. They were still struggling with the fallout from Adrian's disastrous real estate venture, the one that had left them with a crushing $110,000 debt. She and Clyde, 61, had been quietly chipping away at it, making larger payments when they could, but they were nowhere near paying it off, not even close. She immediately called Clyde, who was out playing golf. "Clyde, did you pay off the mortgage?" she demanded, her voice tight with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. "What? No, Sasha, you know we can't afford that right now," he replied, his voice muffled by the phone. "Why? Did something happen?" "The bank sent a letter. It says our mortgage is paid. By some Michelle D. Holdings, LLC." A beat of silence. Then, "Michelle who?" "No, I don't know anything about that." "Are you sure it's not a scam?" "It's on official letterhead, Clyde. This is real." "Someone paid off our mortgage." Sasha hung up, her mind racing. If not Clyde, then who? Adrian. It had to be Adrian, 34. Maybe his latest venture had actually paid off, and he was trying to surprise them. It would be just like him to make a grand gesture without telling anyone. She dialed Adrian's number. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "Adrian, did you pay off our mortgage?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. Another pause. No, Mom. Why would I do that? I'm still, building capital. What are you talking about?" Sasha explained the letter, the LLC name. Adrian sounded genuinely confused, even a little annoyed. "Michelle D? Never heard of them." "Look, Mom, I'm in the middle of a call. I'll ask around, but I really doubt it's anything to do with me." He hung up. Sasha stared at her phone, then at the letter. Not Clyde, not Adrian. Who then? Milena, 36? Stephanie, 33? No, they would have said something. Milena would have made a big deal out of it, and Stephanie would have posted about it on social media, framing it as a family triumph. And besides, neither of them had the kind of liquid cash to just wipe out a six-figure debt. Her eyes fell on the return address on the envelope. It was a P.O. box, but the city and zip code were clear. The same city where Zoe, 32, lived. The same city where Zoe's little wellness studio was located. A cold, unsettling thought began to form. No, it couldn't be. Zoe? Her quiet, unassuming daughter who still did massages? The one who barely made enough to keep herself afloat, in Sasha's estimation? It was laughable, and yet, the name, Michelle D. Zoe's middle name was Michelle, and D was for Delgado. It was too much of a coincidence. Sasha picked up her phone again, her fingers hovering over Zoe's contact. She needed answers, but she couldn't just blurt it out. She needed to be subtle, to fish. She decided to leave a voicemail. It felt less confrontational, gave Zoe space to respond or not. After the beep, Sasha forced a light, casual tone into her voice. "Hi, Zoe, it's Mom. Just calling to see how you are, dear. And, well, I received a rather curious letter today. Do you know anything about Michelle D?" She ended the call, her heart hammering. The silence on the other end felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken possibilities. Sasha's voicemail, the one asking about Michelle D, sat in my inbox for 3 days. 3 days of me staring at my phone, seeing her name pop up with texts. "Just checking in, dear. Hope you're well. Did you get my message about that curious letter?" And ignoring every single one. My finger hovered over the delete button more than once. The thought of confronting her, of finally pulling back the curtain on the secret I'd kept for so long, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Vada, bless her, had noticed my distraction. "You're walking around like you're waiting for a shoe to drop," she'd observed one afternoon, watching me absent mindedly rearrange a display of essential oils for the third time. "Everything okay?" "Just family stuff," I'd mumbled. She'd just nodded, her eyes knowing. "Remember what I said about hiding your wins?" Her words had echoed in my head. Time for someone to notice. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time. The constant, low level hum of being underestimated, of being the family's invisible disappointment, had been a heavy cloak for too long. On the fourth day, a Tuesday, I finally decided to call her back. I was in my office, the door closed, the sounds of the studio muffled. My heart was thumping a rhythm against my ribs, a strange mix of dread and anticipation. I took a deep breath and dialed. She answered on the first ring, almost as if she'd been waiting. "Zoe?" "Oh, hello, dear. I was just thinking about you." Her voice was polite, almost overly so, but there was a strained quality underneath, like a violin string pulled too tight. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my own voice neutral. "How are things at the studio? Busy, I imagine. You're always so busy." It was the usual small talk, the kind that always felt like a preamble to something else. She asked about my week, about a client she vaguely remembered me mentioning once. I gave terse, polite answers. I could almost hear her trying to find the right entry point. Then, the pause, the one that always came before the real question. "Zoe," she began, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. "About that letter I mentioned. The one about the mortgage." My grip tightened on my phone. Here it was. "Yes?" I prompted, keeping my tone flat. "Well, it said the mortgage was paid off. Completely. And the payment came from Michelle D. Holdings, LLC." She paused, letting the name hang in the air. "Do you do you know anything about that, dear? We've asked Adrian, and he has no idea. Your father is baffled. It's all very mysterious." I closed my eyes for a brief second. The silence stretched thick and heavy between us. I could picture her on the other end, probably clutching the phone, her brow furrowed with suspicion and a dawning, unwelcome realization. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for, consciously or unconsciously, for years. I opened my eyes and looked at the framed photo on my desk. Vada and me, smiling, covered in paint from our renovation efforts. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. "Who is Michelle D?" she repeated, a little more insistent this time, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. I took another slow, deliberate breath. "That's me. Mom," I said, my voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Michelle is my middle name, and D is for Delgado." Another beat of silence, longer this time. I could almost hear her brain scrambling, trying to reconcile the failure she'd always seen with the person who had just paid off her entire mortgage. Then I added, just for good measure, the words I'd heard countless times, the label they'd all affixed to me for so long. "That's me. The failure." And then, before she could utter a single sound, before she could formulate a question, or an accusation, or an apology, I pressed the end call button. The click was loud in the sudden silence of my office. I lowered the phone slowly, my hands still trembling, but this time not from dread. I stood there, rooted to the spot, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could truly breathe. Deep, full, unburdened breaths. The click of the phone disconnecting from Sasha in Chapter 5 was the loudest sound I'd heard in years. It wasn't just the end of a call. It felt like the end of an era, a severing of an old, suffocating cord. For a few days, I felt light, almost giddy. Then, the silence from my family was deafening. No calls from Adrian, no texts from Milena or Stephanie, not even Dad. It was as if I'd vanished, or perhaps as if they were waiting for me to apologize for existing. A few weeks after that call, the Sunday texts started. Sasha, 58, had always been predictable, Every Sunday morning, without fail, a text would pop up on my phone. Not about the mortgage, not about Michelle D. Holdings, LLC. Never about that. Just innocuous things. Good morning, dear. Just made a lovely quiche. Recipe attached. Hope you're having a restful Sunday. Thinking of you. Milena and Santiago are hosting brunch next month. You should come. Saw a new spa open downtown. Yours is still doing well, I hope? Each one was a tiny, barbed hook designed to elicit a response, to pull me back into the family orbit on her terms. And each one I ignored. I didn't block her number, I just let them pile up, unread, a silent testament to the new boundary I was meticulously building. Instead of replying, I started journaling. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, just a need to put down the swirling thoughts that had been trapped inside me for so long. Pages filled with memories, the time Sasha had redecorated my childhood bedroom without asking, throwing out my art supplies because they made a mess, Adrian getting a new car after failing out of college while I was working two jobs to pay my tuition, Milena's constant, subtle digs about my niche career. It was all there, the quiet accumulation of years of emotional neglect, of being the family's afterthought. Writing it down didn't make the pain disappear, but it made it tangible, something I could look at, acknowledge, and begin to process. My studio continued to thrive. Vada, 29, was a whirlwind of energy, constantly pushing me to think bigger. She'd been my biggest cheerleader since she joined me 8 months ago, and she saw the potential I often overlooked. Zoe, we need to do a soft launch for the expanded space, she insisted one afternoon, waving a marketing plan in front of me. Invite local businesses, some of our best clients, maybe a few influencers. Get some buzz going. I cringed. A launch? Vada, you know I hate that kind of attention. We're doing fine with word of mouth. Doing fine isn't enough when you've built something this incredible, she countered, her arms crossed. You always hide your wins. This isn't just about massages anymore, Zoe. You've built a community, a haven. People need to see that. You need to let people see that. Her words resonated, but the old discomfort lingered. The idea of being in the spotlight, of celebrating my own success, felt alien. It felt like I was inviting judgment, or worse, dismissal. I'd spent so long being invisible, it was hard to imagine being seen. A few weeks later, the sting of invisibility hit again, not from my mother, but from Milena, 36. I was scrolling through social media, a rare moment of downtime, when I saw her post. It was a picture of her, Adrian, and Stephanie, all smiling brightly at some fancy restaurant. The caption read, "So grateful for family who understand the true meaning of ambition and success. Some people just can't handle family success, but we thrive together." My name wasn't mentioned, of course. It never was. But the message was clear, a thinly veiled jab at my perceived lack of ambition and my supposed inability to handle their shining achievements. It cut deep, a familiar wound reopened. Even after everything, even after the mortgage, they still saw me as the same old Zoe, the one who couldn't quite measure up, the one who was still doing massages. I closed the app, a familiar tightness in my chest. Some people just can't handle family success. The irony was a bitter pill. That evening, as I was closing up the studio, my phone buzzed with a notification. A new Yelp review. I usually let Vada handle those, but curiosity got the better of me. The review was glowing, 5 stars, praising the serene atmosphere and healing touch. It was anonymous, signed simply S. My breath hitched. S. Sasha. It couldn't be. Could it? The Yelp review, signed simply S, gnawed at me. Was it Mom? Sasha, 58, leaving an anonymous, glowing review after months of me ignoring her Sunday texts. It felt out of character, and yet the possibility lingered, a tiny, unsettling seed of curiosity. Despite my discomfort with attention, Vada, 29, had finally convinced me to host a private event. Not a grand public launch, but a small, intimate celebration for my studio's first year in its expanded space. It's about acknowledging your hard work, Zoe, she'd said, her voice firm but kind. not for them, but for you, and for the people who believe in you. So, a few months after the Yelp review appeared, I sent out invitations. Not to my family, not to Sasha, Clyde, Adrian, Milena, Stephanie, Santiago, or Ellis. This was for my clients, my friends, the local businesses who had supported me, and my incredible staff. About 30 people, a cozy crowd. The evening arrived, a crisp autumn night. The studio was transformed. Soft lighting, a local jazz duo playing quietly in the corner, and the air filled with the scent of lavender and success. I wore a simple black dress, feeling more comfortable than I had in years. I was surrounded by people who genuinely appreciated what I did, who saw me. It was liberating. I was laughing with a longtime client, discussing the new aromatherapy blends, when the door opened. The jazz music seemed to falter for a beat. My smile froze. Standing in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always, was Sasha, my mother, uninvited. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on me. Her expression was unreadable, a strange mix of defiance and something else. My stomach clenched. This was exactly what I'd feared, a scene, a confrontation, in front of everyone. Vada, ever perceptive, stepped subtly closer to me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Zoe? She murmured. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. This was my space, my moment. Sasha began to walk toward me, her heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. The conversations around us slowly died down. Everyone seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. My staff, my clients, my friends. They all turned, watching. She stopped a few feet in front of me, her gaze unwavering. Her eyes, usually so critical, held a strange glint. Zoe, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. I know. The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Everyone froze, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the public accusation, the humiliation, the moment she would finally tear down everything I'd built. But then, something unexpected happened. Her shoulders seemed to slump, just slightly. The defiance in her eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of something akin to awe. I know what you did, she repeated, her voice quieter this time, almost a whisper. She looked around the beautiful, bustling studio, at the smiling faces of my staff, at the proud expressions of my clients. Her gaze returned to me, lingering. I never thought you could pull something like this off. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a shout. It was a concession, a quiet, almost reluctant admission. The words delivered in front of everyone felt like a strange kind of victory, not loud, not triumphant, but profoundly satisfying. A slow smile spread across my face, genuine and unforced, the kind of smile I hadn't allowed myself around her in years. That's the problem, Mom, I said, my voice steady, clear, and calm. You never asked what I was capable of. The jazz music started up again, a little hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. People slowly resumed their conversations, though many glances still darted our way. Sasha just stood there, looking at me, really looking at me, for what felt like the first time. One of my staff members, unaware of the tension, approached us with a tray of small, perfectly portioned apple tarts. Would you like one, Mrs. Delgado? Zoe made them herself. Sasha's eyes flickered to the tart, then back to me. She picked one up, took a bite. Her eyes widened. She froze mid-chew. Then, slowly, she looked up at me, the tart still half eaten in her hand. Her voice was barely audible. You made this? I met her gaze, a tiny, knowing smirk playing on my lips. No, Mom, I said, my voice sweet, echoing her words from that night at Milena's. A bakery did. The memory of Sasha, 58, standing in my studio, her face a mask of bewildered realization as she bit into that apple tart, still brought a quiet satisfaction months later. The private event had been a success, not just for the studio, but for me. It was the first time I'd truly owned my space, my success, without the need for their approval. Since that night, the Sunday texts from Sasha hadn't stopped. They were still there every week, a relentless drip of innocuous updates and invitations. Your father and I went to the botanical gardens today. So lovely. You should come with us sometime. Adrian's new business is really taking off. He's so busy. Hope you're not overworking yourself, dear. Sometimes she'd send a picture of a flower or a recipe for a casserole. I never replied. Not once. The silence from my end was a deliberate choice, a boundary I was finally strong enough to maintain. It wasn't about being cruel, it was about protecting my peace. My phone, usually buzzing with client bookings and staff questions, rarely lit up with a call from my family. Adrian, 34, Milena, 36, Stephanie, 33. They remained in their own orbit, probably still discussing my lack of ambition over brunch, blissfully unaware of the quiet earthquake I'd caused. Dad, Clyde, 61, remained silent, as he always had. I didn't expect him to change. He was a man who preferred the path of least resistance, and that path rarely involved confronting Sasha. Life at the Quiet Haven, however, was anything but quiet. We were thriving. The expanded space was fully utilized, with new clients booking daily. I'd recently hired two new massage therapists and a front desk assistant, easing some of the pressure on Vada 29 and me. I spent more time training, mentoring, and planning for future expansions. We were looking into offering small wellness workshops, maybe even a meditation series. My days were long, but they were filled with purpose, with the tangible results of my own hard work. My life was full now, not loud or flashy, but deeply satisfying. I had a thriving business, a supportive partner in Vada, and a small circle of friends who saw me, truly saw me, for who I was. The constant need for external validation, particularly from my family, had finally begun to recede. It was like a chronic ache that had finally started to heal. I often thought about the mortgage, the $100,000. It was a significant sum, but it hadn't crippled me. Instead, it had liberated me in a way money never could. It wasn't about the financial transaction, it was about the power it gave me. The power to choose silence, to choose my own path, to finally shed the skin of the failure they had so carefully crafted for me. The revenge, if you could even call it that, hadn't changed Sasha. She was still Sasha, obsessed with appearances, subtly manipulative, and probably still convinced that my success was some kind of anomaly. But that wasn't the point. The point was, it had changed me. It had given me the courage to stop seeking their approval, to stop trying to fit into their narrow definition of success. I no longer needed them to see me. I saw myself, and that was enough. One crisp afternoon, a few months after the studio event, I was walking home after a long day. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. I passed a small, independent bakery I'd never noticed before, its windows steaming with the warmth inside. A display of freshly baked pies sat on a rack, their crusts golden and inviting. A small smirk touched my lips. I paused, then pushed open the door, the scent of cinnamon and apples washing over me. I walked up to the counter, pointed to a perfect apple pie, and paid for it. Sometimes silence is loud enough.